U.S. House office building evacuated after electrical issue. An interesting article in The Hill. It's an opinion article, mind you, but it illustrates a scary picture regarding China and Russia and their military advancements. Then we have 800 active duty troops to be sent down to the Mexican border to help as needed with the migrant caravan. And then the Washington Post talks about the notorious RBG and how she blames Congress for being the culprit for polarizing the confirmation process. And lastly, Senator Chuck Grassley asked justice to investigate Michael Avenatti and Julia Swetnick. Now, we'll start off with the article from Yahoo about the U.S. office building being evacuated after an electrical issue. Go ahead and read the article. It's originally from Reuters. That's where Yahoo got this from. So, a building adjacent to the U.S. Capitol that houses lawmakers' offices was evacuated on Thursday after a fire alarm was triggered by an electrical malfunction, Capitol Police said. After slightly more than an hour, authorities allowed people to re-enter after officials discovered a malfunctioning electrical panel, police said in the statement. Most members of the House of Representatives are in their home district campaigning for re-election during the congressional recess. Several packages have been delivered to leading Democrats and others in the United States in recent days. However, there was no indication that the Cannon evacuation was related. There have been extensive renovations going on in the Cannon building, and it was unclear whether the evacuation was related to the construction issues. Now, we don't know what's going on here with this building. We don't know what's going on with the package bombs that were sent to these predominant Democrats as well. But it does seem that since there are renovations going on at this building, it could just be very likely that this was just a accident, nothing more, and that's it. Maybe nothing has to do with the packages. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with the packages. However, I do want to talk about the packages because there have been more found and delivered to other predominant Democrats, and that goes the people who have received them now on top of the ones who have already got them are former Attorney General Eric Holder, former Vice President Joe Biden, former the head of the CIA, and Congresswoman Maxine Waters have all received these suspicious bomb packages as well. Now, we don't know exactly what's going on here. I think it's very wrong, as I stated yesterday, that we're jumping to conclusions in the media, blaming Trump's rhetoric and blaming right-wing thinkers for promoting this kind of act when nobody has ever said, at least on the right, and I'm sure on the left too, to go out and set out bombs and attack the Democrats. However, we do see that for former Attorney General Eric Holder when he said, and I quote, "When they go low, we kick them." So, and then Maxine Waters telling everybody, telling all her followers that if they see any of Trump's cabinet members to harass them wherever they're at. So, not pointing fingers here, but we're not seeing anything of that type of rhetoric coming from the right. Now, Trump does have some negative things to say about his opponents and about Democrats in particular. However, he is, besides that one time on the campaign trail where he said, if you punch the dude, I'll pay for your legal fees, that was wrong. That was way wrong. That was inciting violence right there, and that was wrong. That was so wrong. But as president, he hasn't said anything along those lines to encourage any of these type of actions that have occurred. But the media doesn't seem to care about that. They just want to blame him and his rhetoric for these bombs that were sent. Now, I do have to add that there are law enforcement that have looked into this, and as their investigation has unfolded, they believe that these bombs may not have been set to explode, but more of a scare tactic because they were poorly built and they had a timer on them, which they say that usually in these kind of cases, if the bomb was really going to go off and if it really was a threat, there wouldn't be a timer on it because why would the bomber want you to know when it's going to detonate? That defeats the whole purpose. Usually if there's a bomb and it's set in mailboxes or sent in the mail, whatever, the way these were distributed, you would assume that it would try to be one of those surprise attacks. It wouldn't have something saying 5 minutes until detonation. They equated that to something out of the movies. So they state that this is more of just a scare tactic. So then, which makes me a little suspicious on where this is actually coming from. I'm not saying it's a political stunt, because it could be something politically motivated on the right, as far as somebody who is insane and evil wanting to cause harm on innocent people and do not like them because they are Democrats and of the other political persuasion than they are, which is totally wrong, because if we start doing this and conflating whether it be Democrats with good or Republicans with good, and then conflating Democrats with evil or Republicans with evil, vice versa, switch it around however way you want to. Once we start conflating your political affiliation with, good or evil, then bad things start to happen. We're talking about a civil war that can erupt because of that. And that's not good at all. So if this is politically motivated on the right, that's horrible. But we do have predominant Republican thought leaders, as I addressed yesterday, that are coming out against this. So that is good. Now, the thing that makes it suspicious for me, and I'm not just going to preface on this, I'm not saying this is a political stunt on the left to encourage voters to go out and vote Democratic. What I am saying is that we don't have all the evidence, so we cannot exclude this from the table. We have 2 weeks before the midterms. 2 weeks. There are very, very close and tight races happening right now for House and Senate seats, and gubernatorial races as well. Very tight races. So, we cannot say it's out of the realm of possibilities that this is a politically motivated move on the left to encourage people to come out and vote Democratic and use this as a scare tactic. I don't think we can wave that off the table. However, I do think it is way more likely that this is just some crazy person who was sick in the head and has no connections whatsoever with the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and this is just one individual who, or maybe it's multiple, I don't know. But another thing that's suspicious about it, now that I'm thinking about it, is that these packages were delivered widely across the country in New York, California, I believe in Delaware, if I'm not mistaken, and somewhere down south for former Attorney General Eric Holder, and then D.C. So they're all over the country. So I don't know if it's just one person. And there's another suspicious thing that we addressed yesterday, that the former head of the DNC, her address was the return address on the packages sent to Obama, the Clintons, and Soros. But I also have to add that she received one too at her office in Sunrise, Florida. And her name, as I stated yesterday, is Debbie Weiserman Schultz. She's a congresswoman now, I believe, for Florida. But she was the former head of the DNC. And her address was the return address on 3 of those packages. Now, we don't know who's doing this. We don't know whatsoever. So I'm not claiming anything. I'm just not leaving anything off the table. And I think that's the way we should treat this situation, is that, hey, we need to figure out who did this. So let's just throw out all the possible scenarios. That's all I'm saying. That is all I'm saying when I throw in the fact that it could be a political stunt on the left. Just saying. I don't think it is. I don't really think it is. But it could be. And I don't really put it past them as a possibility just because of what happened with the Brett Kavanaugh investigation, which we'll go ahead and transition over to right now, that article for Senator Chuck Grassley. Before we touch on this, what I was getting at with the, I wouldn't put it past them because of the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation, what they did with the sexual assault case that came out against him with Dr. Ford, and then Julia Swetnick, who everybody forgot about, but she should have been the one everybody remembers because she claimed Brett Kavanaugh was a gang rapist, which there was no proof, no evidence, and nobody could corroborate that story. And he vehemently denies ever even seeing her or knowing who she is. But Dr. Ford has basically dropped all the charges against Brett Kavanaugh now Justice Kavanaugh. And we had no corroborating evidence. We had changes of stories going on and on and on. Senator Dianne Feinstein had the information for 8 weeks. 8 weeks. And did nothing with it until 2 days before the confirmation hearing. So that's why I state I don't put anything past the Democrats right now. This is not saying the Republicans are the party of good, and this is not saying the Democrats are the party of evil. That's not what I'm saying whatsoever. All I'm suggesting is that the Democrats have been playing a little dirty as of lately. I'm not saying that Trump isn't a dirty man and that he doesn't sling mud back at him, because he sure does. But it does seem that there is a collective attempt to maintain power within the Democratic Party. So, now going on to this article, Senator Chuck Grassley, he basically stated that he would ask the Attorney General Jeff Sessions and the FBI to investigate potential conspiracy, false statements, and obstruction of Congress. Grassley said it was request for investigation and not a criminal allegation. Avenatti welcomed further investigation. This was a quote from Avenatti, and I'm reading this from USA Today. Senator Grassley has just made a major mistake. Let the investigation into Kavanaugh and his lies begin. So this is the tweet sent out October 25th, today, at 1:04 p.m. By Michael Avenatti. And this was his response to Senator Chuck Grassley's ask for an investigation. And it states, it is ironic that Senator Chuck Grassley now is interested in investigation. He didn't care when it came to putting a man on the Supreme Court for his life. We welcome the investigation, as now we can finally get to the bottom of Judge Kavanaugh's lies and let the truth be known. So, what I see here is somebody who, quite frankly, doesn't seem that they have learned from their mistakes, because the DNC is the Democratic Party has totally dropped Michael Avenatti after this, because he failed them. He said that, he was going to make sure he didn't get on the Supreme Court because he had evidence and he had proof that there was sexual assault cases that were very reliable and valid against Brett Kavanaugh, and that turned out to not be the case. All we saw was false statements continuously. Nobody even remembers Julia Swetnick, and you would think people would remember her because she had the most outrageous claim and most disgusting claim out against Brett Kavanaugh, if it was true that he was a gang rapist, that he was drugging the punch bowl at parties and getting girls drugged up and then taking advantage of them. But it was very suspicious, and her accusations against Brett Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh, because she stated that she saw them do this several times at other parties. And so then, the question then to be asked is, why would you keep going to those parties if you saw other women being abused this way, and then you end up somehow falling victim to something that you've seen done several times? That just doesn't make any sense to me, and I believe that she's a smart person. I have no reason not to believe that, so who wouldn't be able to realize that pattern if this was a true situation, that this person did drug the punch and then proceeded with his buddies to rape these women who were drugged up and couldn't control what was going on and just taken advantage of? Why would you proceed to go to those parties? Why would you not call the cops? Why would you drink from the punch if you have seen all these things on numerous occasions? So it is just very, very convenient that she also came out about this and accused him of sexual harassment on top of Dr. Ford, when Justice Kavanaugh has vehemently denied any of these accusations against him. And there have been no corroborating evidence once again. And this all happened, let's not forget, this happened 2 days before the confirmation hearing. 2 days. 2 days. So this, regardless if this was real or not, this had some political motivation behind it. And I believe the reason it had political motivation behind it is because the Democrats were trying to hold off a nominee until after the midterms, so that way they would hopefully, because historically the party in the opposition party, so to speak. I put up quotation marks because the party not in the majority, the minority party, is who I'm referring to by the opposition. It has nothing to do with me being against Democrats. But anyway, so the minority party typically always wins historically back the House after the president of the opposite party gets office. This is an historical fact. So it is very likely that Democrats will win back both houses. It's just historically supposed to happen. So, from what I've heard, and I tend to agree with this opinion, is that they were trying to hold this up so that way they can make sure Justice Kavanaugh doesn't get on the court and we won't have a right-leaning majority on the court. And they can then force Trump to fill the seat with somebody who's a moderate, somebody who maybe is more left-leaning, so that way they can maintain control in the Supreme Court. I tend to agree with that hypothesis there. It just makes sense. It just makes sense. And even the notorious RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, comes out and calls Congress the culprit in polarizing the confirmation process. And this is a let's see here. This is a little short article as well, so I'll go ahead and read it for you all. And it is from CNN Politics, but this is originally from the Washington Post. So it states, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg labeled Congress the culprit for the polarization of the judicial confirmation process, according to the Washington Post. During a discussion Wednesday night at the federal courthouse in Washington, Ginsburg alluded to the newest Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh's contentious confirmation process this fall, the newspaper reported. According to the Post, Ginsburg then noted that the late Justice Antoine Scalia was confirmed to the bench unanimously. For those of you who don't know who that is, he obviously was a Supreme Court justice, and he was an originalist, and basically stuck to the Constitution as it was, and right-leaning, even though they're supposed to not be partisan. And I don't think that he was partisan. All I'm saying is that he had more of a right-leaning philosophy as far as his judicial view. Continuing, this is a quote from Ginsburg after making the statement that Justice Scalia was confirmed to the bench unanimously. What a difference in time that was from what we are witnessing today, Ginsburg said, the Post reported. To me, the obvious culprit is Congress, Ginsburg said, commenting on how fractured the confirmation process is, the Post reported. The Senate confirmation earlier this month on a 50 confirmed Kavanaugh earlier this month on a 50-48 vote, one of the closest votes in history. The 85-year-old justice, who recently marked 25 years on the bench, also laminated what she said was a lack of effort to reach across the aisle, the newspaper noted. Ginsburg praised retired Justice Sandra Day O'Connor for putting country above party and self-interest and working collaboratively to solve problems. The Post reported Ginsburg commented about her former colleague came a day after O'Connor announced that she has been diagnosed with beginning stages of dementia, probably Alzheimer's disease, and is stepping away from public life. So very sad to hear about Justice O'Connor. Very sad. But getting back to the article at hand here, I think that the notorious RBG makes a fair point when she states that Congress is the one to blame for this polarization that took place for nominating a Supreme Court justice, because they were asking him straight up questions to see if there was any bias or anything regarding his philosophy on law, on how to, be a judge. And that's not really what you should do, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to pry him, make this political, and that isn't what it is. And we go back to the whole sex scandal thing 2 days before the nomination. It's just all... It's very concerning. That's what it is. And hopefully we can get this back together and we can come together collectively as a country, because we need to. We have bigger issues at hand than this. Way bigger issues at hand. And for whatever reason, we keep talking about gender inequalities, systematic racism, or systemic racism, however you want to say it. But we have so much bigger issues at hand, and not saying that we shouldn't talk about gender inequality or the racial issues or sexual assault cases such as this in the Me Too movement. I think it's good that we have things like the Me Too movement. I think it's good that we have conversations about gender inequality. I think it's good that we at least talk about systemic racism, even though I don't believe in systemic racism, nor do I believe that there is really much in gender inequality, because the facts prove otherwise. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because I read an interesting opinion article from the former, he was I believe the former U.S. ambassador and also the Secretary of Navy as well. His name is William Middendorf. And basically what he's going over here in this opinion article is that by 2030, China's plan is to have roughly 550 warships and submarines, which is twice the size of the United States' Navy. And they want to push the United States out of Asia to become the world superpower, and their goal is to do this by 2030. Now, as you could hear in prior episodes, we've talked about the United States entering into the Southeast Asian countries because we're trying to combat and mitigate the effects of bullying that China is committing to these other countries by making fortified islands on the South Chinese Sea and the tensions increasing on the naval front between the United States and China. You know, we're creating allies over there with Taiwan, who we're selling arms to now. We have training going on in the Philippines. Jim Mattis just met with Vietnam, and then he went to Singapore. We have these things going on right now, basically indicating that tensions with China are not that great, on top of the trade war. And the trade war, as we've covered in prior episodes, is really, really, really hurting China right now because their economy was already in a cooling off period before the trade wars hit. So when they hit, it just made things that much worse. And also, we have Japan and Australia and European countries coming out against China as well because of the way they treat intellectual property by forcing people to give it over if they want to, all their secrets and whatever, in order to do business in China, which it is a very lucrative thing to do business in China because China has one of the, if not the biggest middle classes in the world. So why wouldn't you want to hit that? Because that's where most of the consumption comes from. If I remember this statistic correctly, I believe it's like 2/3 of all consumption comes from the middle class. So why would you not want to target the middle class? So basically China's just strong-arming other people to give them their secrets so that way China can then build upon that. Because China has to do something because they're fearing a blockade or a new Cold War with the U.S., which will mean that they'll be cut off from a lot of the world. And then we also have concerns going on in the World Trade Organization, which we talked about yesterday. And with the World Trade Organization not doing anything to mitigate the effects of China dumping steel, and also regarding the intellectual property. We have people coming out against that vehemently, other countries. And then we have the Five Eye intelligence coming in against China as well, which I know the United States is in it. I know Australia's in it. I believe New Zealand's in it. I think Great Britain's in it. And I want to say Germany. And I think extra countries that may be in it outside of the Five Eyes intelligence is Japan and maybe Australia. I know the Five Eye intelligence for sure is working to spread information about what China's doing, and we've covered a whole episode on this. If you want to go back and look at that, I have a whole episode covering on major issues happening in China regarding the concentration camps that's been developed to host Muslims, to force them to give up their religion and convert to a communist way of thinking. So China is a huge threat, And on top of that, we have concerns about our flaws in cybersecurity regarding our defense weapon systems and our weapon systems in general. This came out the other day from GAO, the Government Accountability Office, and they found that there was so many flaws in our weapon systems that it isn't good, and that we're like way behind on some of our stuff. And not only that, but we are kind of lacking when it comes to our military right now, because it looks like in this article here, the Air Force has received an overall rating of weak in readiness, a problem compounded by crippling shortage of fighter pilots and fighter crafts. The Army faces huge readiness problems. Its brigade combat teams are the building blocks of America grounded combat, yet only 15 of the 31 teams are considered ready, and only 8 are rated as fully ready. And then lastly, the Marine Corps, worn down by years of near continuous combat engagement and insufficient reinvestment, is in the worst shape of all the services, with half of its waterships and tactical aircrafts fleets unavailable for current operation. The index rated the corps as weak overall. Now, this isn't good. This is not good. And this comes from the 2009 Index of Military Strength released by the Heritage Foundation. So it is a very smart move, I believe, for what Trump's doing and pressuring them for the trade war, as we've talked about. I have a whole episode on this too. You can see it on IGTV, YouTube, or just on the podcast if you want to listen to it, however way you wish to consume it, even on Spotify. But anyway, so Trump has put pressure with the trade war, has called them out for the stealing of intellectual property, and we're building up alliances in Southeast Asia to mitigate the effects of intimidation that is going on by China. So Trump is actually taking actions to do something about China forcing their way to the top of the heap. And now Russia's also in this mix too, because Russia's trying to advance their military buildup as well and modernize it. They actually expect to have 150 additional naval ships and have 8,000 nuclear warheads additionally by 2026. This is also indication that what President Trump is doing as far as withdrawing from the INF treaty to renegotiate it or try to put something way different in place where China can be involved, because China wasn't involved before. It was only the Soviet Union and America. So if we can get China involved in this as well, then we can eliminate a lot of this issue. And I think it will be the right thing to do because of this. So when we think about power, we just think about individuals. We think about people who will manipulate, steal, do whatever they have to do to reach the top of the heap and whatever it is that they want to do. So hierarchy. So there's a top of the hierarchy, and you kind of have an idea on where you're at in that hierarchy, and you know who's at the top of the hierarchy. And at the top of a governmental hierarchy is the President of the United States. And that is unanimous across the board for every other country as well. The top of the hierarchy for governments is the United States. And China right now is second, with the second strongest economy, huge army, and they're second. So you mean to tell me that China, if the opportunity doesn't present itself, will not try to take over that top spot as the world superpower? Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? And if they did, that would be scary, because they don't even care about their own people. They're putting their own people in concentration camps. They're putting their own people under prison, essentially. Putting them in prison, essentially, by living in China. You're forced to basically think one way if you want to have a free life. Because guess what? They have a social credit system, which we've talked about before. And that basically collects all your data, and it determines whether you have a negative or positive score. And that negative score can mean that you can't travel out of the country. Maybe if it's low enough, you can't travel out of your city. Maybe if it's low enough, you can't get a bus ticket for something, or a train ticket, or go somewhere, or buy certain things. So if China has no care for their people and just only cares about pushing their agenda and making their country better, as far as for the elitist in China, what makes us think that they're not going to try to do something extremely evil with the rest of the world if they become the world superpower? If they become the world superpower, then guess what? They're the ones calling these shots when it comes to the geopolitical thing. They will have the most sway. Right now, America pulls most of that sway. We have most of the influence, if not, I wouldn't say all. Well, I say we have most of the influence on the geopolitical front. We shouldn't want a country like China to do that, nor should we want a country like Russia to do that. And, as stated in a prior episode, the current FBI director and the current Homeland Security Secretary have both said China's more of a threat when it comes to meddling in our elections. And there's major evidence that China's already hacked into a lot of our power infrastructure and things like that, and stolen military secrets. And yeah, so very scary times that we're living in, and yet this is why we're talking about things that should be on the bottom of our list when it comes to issues going on in today's world. When we talk about systemic racism, there are no laws on the books barring any person of color or any ethnic group from doing anything in America. Not one. That's the definition of systemic racism. You should have laws on the books. There are no laws on the books. If you want something, go out and get it. Am I saying that racism isn't a thing? No, racism is a thing. We have some ignorant people out there and disgusting people out there who think it's okay to judge somebody based on their skin color. And if they're ignorant, then guess what? We can educate them and help them realize that their way of thinking is not healthy for anybody. And it's just promoting hate. And promoting hate isn't good. But for the most part, we live in a very, very free country, and a country that provides endless of opportunities if you go out and look for them. Quite literally, there are tons of opportunities everywhere. If you want something here, you just have to go and get it. That's plain and simple. You have to take responsibilities for your actions and make sure that you're taken care of before you try to take care of anybody else. Because who can you help if you don't even have your life together? How can you give advice when you don't even have your life together? This goes for everybody. I'm not just talking to any racial group whatsoever. This goes for everybody. Everybody should have their lives together before you go trying to help other people out. That just makes sense. If you don't have your world straight, how can you help other people get their world together? So, really, when it comes down to it, you just have to go out and get yours. Really, there's no excuse. I get it that some people grow up harder than others. There's no lie in that. Hell, my dad grew up in Puerto Rico. Grew up in a very, very poor area in Puerto Rico. And not the safest place either. Single mother, 4 siblings, and she was working all the time. And so basically, they had to take care of themselves. Pretty much their whole lives. And then my grandma, well, step back a little bit, they moved from Puerto Rico to New York, back to Puerto Rico, and then my grandma ends up moving to Michigan without my dad and his brother, my uncle. And so my dad was only 14, and my uncle may have been 16, 18. I'm not sure how much older he is than my dad. Anyway, so they, I believe, lived with their grandmother over there. Didn't really grow up with anything. My dad said that he had, if I'm not mistaken, a pair of boots that he played basketball in, and his principal ended up buying him, and the coach ended up buying him a pair of tennis shoes, basketball shoes, because he was playing in boots. And he wore jeans all the time too. He only had like one pair of jeans or 2 pair of jeans. And same with my mom. My mom grew up from a very low income family. She had both of her parents though, but working class, never went without, but never had anything really extra either. And the reason I bring this up is because both of my parents now, they're both high school dropouts. However, they're both doing very well. Very well. My dad and mom both, have a very, very good jobs. And they did this because of hard work. They make a very good living, and they're able to, I would say they're middle class, maybe upper middle class. But anyway, point being is that I have tons of family members who are at the bottom and are struggling and are in government assistance. So I get that. I empathize with that majorly. But I also have parents who were at that level too. As a matter of fact, my parents had government assistance when I was first born. So yes, I empathize with that completely. However, there's no excuse for you not to get to where you want to get to in life, especially in America. So, that being said, we have bigger issues to worry about, people. We have issues like China. We have issues like AI that we don't even understand or be able to comprehend what's going to happen with AI. So, I think that we should be worrying about these kind of things a lot more than we're worrying about racial issues and gender inequality, because that's another myth. The gender pay gap isn't real. You're talking about a skewed statistic. And the reason I say that is women typically make the same amount as a man if they've been in the field the same amount of years without any breaks in between. And typically what happens is that when the pay differences start to show is when women become of age, not of age, that was the wrong way to put it, but when women get ready to have children and settle down to have a family, they typically leave their job for a period of time to have the kid, raise the kid. And that's the right thing to do, in my opinion. You should always pick your family over work. You should always pick your family over a career or all of that, in my opinion. So that's typically when you see the drop-off. Now, it's also true that women dominate the healthcare field. They do very well in the healthcare field. And men are typically going for the higher paying jobs. So I think that there's not a fair comparison there, because they include part-time jobs and full-time jobs. They don't account for degrees, they don't account for occupation. They just lump everything together when men and women work in completely different fields. And this has nothing to do with social constructs either, because we have the Scandinavian countries that are probably one of the most egalitarian countries in the world, and they have no gender law, like gender status quos to make sure it's split evenly in each field, 50-50 with men and women. You know what they do? They just let them do their thing. That's egalitarian, when government gets completely out of it and people start deciding what they want to do, and everything is smooth sailing. You can't always say it's smooth sailing, but getting to my point is that women are predominantly working in fields where women hold the most interest. I can just give you an example with like teaching and healthcare, and men are typically working in fields that intrigue them, which are working on things, and women like to work with people. I'm not saying this is a ubiquitous thing, but there is some strong overlap as well when it comes to men and women and their temperament. There's a lot of overlaps, but there's differences too. That's a beautiful thing. That's called diversity. But for whatever reason, we ignore that part of diversity. Anyway, so we shouldn't be worrying about those things. There's bigger issues to worry about. Now, the last thing we're talking about today is going to be something I read in the Military Times. It's also in a couple other news publications as well. It's 800 active duty troops to be sent to the Mexican border. Now, this is in regards to the caravan that's coming through Mexico right now. And they're not there to do anything to defend the border, but more so just provide support to the border control and the National Guard that are already there, and just make sure that they're okay. And it's unknown if they'll go there with weapons or not. They don't know if they'll be armed. But I do think that this is maybe a decent move, because if this turns out to be anything like the small caravan or migrant group in Spain, where they were throwing stones and feces at the guards and jumping over fences and just forcing their way through, then yeah, we should have extra protection there just in case, because you're talking about a group of 7,300 people, and they can just storm right through. So basically all the 800 troops are doing is just making sure the border's tighter, and just providing additional support, setting up medical centers for border patrol, things of that nature. But I tend to agree with it, just because we don't know who's coming across, and we don't want them. I can't say we, but the government doesn't want them in the country until we get to understand where these people are coming from. And I don't mean geographically, I mean actually what was their life like? What kind of life are they fleeing? Where do they come from as far as their living standards? And why are they trying to seek asylum in America? I think those are things that need to be done first. And in order to enforce them, we need to show up. I think, this is my opinion, I think that we should, as being done here, show that we have no room for error. Hey, we can't let anybody through here until we go through the proper vetting process to make sure that you are a person that truly needs asylum. Because if it's just for employment, then you're not seeking asylum. You're just looking for employment. And in that case, get a visa. Simple as that. So maybe it's not that simple. I'm sure it's a little difficult, especially for some people, to get the visa. Anyhow, that's what's going on right now in the news. There's a lot of things going on. So just trying to stay up on it as much as you can. That's what I'm here for. And we'll be back here tomorrow. I hope you all enjoy the show. And like always, if you have any suggestions on anything you would like me to cover, please let me know, and I'll be happy to do just that. All right. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.